Alright, I didn't do much to this guy, I just gave him a little bit of cheek kind of stuff going on. I might give him like a little bit more wrinkles, but we're essentially gonna bake him down to a low poly, but first we need a low poly model, and I'm gonna show you the ins and outs of that. Just ever so slightly. This is not a model to animate necessarily. There's certain things you do with animation ready models. I will make him quads, but it's not gonna be that much going on. So in object mode, when I try to make a low poly model, I tend to add a plane first. I cut it down the middle, delete one side, and then rotate the other side. And what I'll do is I'll use snapping tools. So I use face project. This is the top part where the magnet is. That's the snapping. That's enabling snapping, and then I use face project so I can basically snap the vertices onto the model. I also tend to add a mirror modifier, um, and I turn on cage. This essentially lets you see what the model is doing, and then I'll turn on retopo mode underneath the side overlay things, mesh edit overlays. This is a relatively new feature, but it's kind of great that it exists. I also turn on clipping. This makes it so the vertices in the middle can never go past each other. And essentially you're ready to start retopoing. It's relatively straightforward. I don't advise retopo flow as much because of the performance it takes up. But if you feel more comfortable, use that. I tend to like using Blender because I know all the tools are the exact same. And I'll actually show you right here. Um, I want to create a little thing first. So we'll create more geometry so I can do this really quickly. There we go. So I'm going to grab this top edge, and then I'm going to do this. I'm going to just bring it all the way up, and then add a whole bunch of slices to it. When you use face nearest, you can actually conform it to the top of this dome by double tapping G. And that is a very useful tool because it allows you to just basically snap a huge plane straight to a rounded object, like in a matter of seconds. So if you ever wanted like a quick way of doing that, there you are. You can do that with cylinders as well. Like if you grabbed a cylinder and or like edges or whatever circles, you can just like kind of conform it to the shape instantly. So there are faster ways of making low poly models with the default tools of Blender. It's just the vast majority of people that I see don't seem to either know. I don't think they know that it's there. I don't think that they don't know that it's possible. I think they just don't know that some of these tools exist that makes retopo and Blender pretty quick to do. There's still like for animation models, you'll still have to do quite a lot of manual topology just because of facial stuff. But the main stuff, like it's pretty simple and straightforward to do in Blender. Um, and the relax tool in Retopo Flow, essentially to get all these quads relaxed, if you know what I'm talking about. They essentially use shrink wrap to do that, and then use the smooth brush at a light degree. They're not doing much to like really do fix the topology, and I'm really surprised that that's how it works. But from my understanding, that's exactly how they did it, because everything in all these add-ons that you see in Blender tend to be vanilla tools that they're just like making into an easier to access thing. That's also why I don't tend to download them as much, like because I know what they're doing, and a lot of them seem to be taking up a lot of performance that would have just made me able to do like I could do this task way faster just instantly. Um, I don't know. There's a couple tools that are really nice to have in there, but it's the same tooling essentially. And all I do is like literally this, where I can just like extrude out one single kind of loop, grab the edges of it, extrude it out again, use face nearest, boom, and then boom, and then you can keep going. It's pretty Pretty straightforward. In fact, I'm trying to close it up, make it simpler geometry to do that with. Yeah, making a low poly model is this straightforward. This is what it takes to make one, really. Not too much involved. The biggest part will be like making the UV islands and baking the textures down. That's the hardest stage of making low poly models. I don't think it's that complicated. Generally, you want to make them low for video games, but low is relative to the engine nowadays. I think if I remember correctly, Call of Duty characters can be upwards of 500k or something crazy. So, what is low? Obviously, optimizing your models is still best practices, and I think making it by hand is probably the best way to optimize it to the best of your ability, because automatic things, while they're nice to have, they don't tend to create the best results from what I've seen. They have a lot of wasted geometry that needs to either be fixed up or like it's just gonna stay in the model. And it's important for performance reasons as far as I know. And in fact, when it comes to actual performance, if I remember correctly reading it, try count isn't actually accurate to what they're using. It's actually the vertice count. But commonly it's just said to be try count if you want to get into the nitty gritty. It's not something that anybody really has to know per se, but if you ever want to like go into the games industry, you do more research on it than me. I'm not trying to go there. I just learned 3D as a hobby and did it really well. That's honestly what happened. Um, and I think it's gonna stay that way. I just really want to believe that this kind of educational material should be out there. Like people should be able to learn Blender and then easily pick it up. I feel like the biggest thing is navigation that's not really taught that well. And it's not even that complex to teach the basic navigation tools that you'll need to move around in Blender. Um, and I started veering off onto different topics vaguely because this is kind of like very boring all the time. Like making low poly models is pretty easy. It's just a mundane task that you have to keep doing. And if you want to do character or even I think other like a lot of times you'll have to be the one to make the low poly. As far as I know, I could be wrong. I've seen some companies and people on ArtStation where they didn't make the low poly model, they made the sculpture. But the thing is, they all vaguely know how it works or how to make. Not vaguely, they know how to make low poly models. Like the person I'm talking about is Jay Hill, and I've seen his topology on his own videos, and he's talked about it. Like it's just good practice to know how to do that yourself, if need be. And I kind of believe it. I'm not a prolific artist or sculptor or anything. I'm just a guy who self-taught himself Blender through YouTube, and then bought ZBrush. That's it. Like I'm just a guy, nothing special. But I do want to help educate people with my YouTube on various different topics. It's really something I'm just passionate about, and just getting you to open your eyes to like looking at different sources. Like I'm not the end all be all. I am not a person that knows everything. Um, so we got the low poly done. That's gonna be the end of that rant, by the way. Well, we got the low poly done pretty much. I'll just get the eyes done really quick, and then we're gonna bake. We're gonna make the UV maps and then bake it. And since this thing isn't that complex, I won't even make the UV maps super complex. Uh, Yeah, really think about this, because I'm getting a triangle. I don't care. Usually you don't want triangles in mods because of subdivision, in a model because of subdivisions. But that's usually only accurate if it's an area that doesn't, supposed to bend, essentially. Like, the facial structure tends to usually bend in animation. Um, this is just a low poly kind of solid object. Triangles don't really matter in objects that aren't bending and moving around in weird ways. Um, and even at the end, like, the model tends to get triangulated. That's not just a justification to go making triangles everywhere. Um, what I mean by they don't bend is like horns and like solid areas where like you wouldn't really see bending, like the tips of fingernails and stuff, like if they're claws. But this is our low poly, this is our high poly, and I'm gonna bake the textures down. I tend to set these in separate folders, and that's only so I can like tell what I'm looking at. And I'm going to actually make the UV layout. We're not going to do anything too complex with this. I'm probably just going to like add a seam all the way around it. And I'm hitting Control R, or no, Control E to mark a seam. You can also right click and then, wait, no, you can't right click anymore. But yeah. And then I hit U and then it'll unwrap. A is to select the entire object, by the way. But what this is doing is in UV editing mode on the tab, which you can also access through the tool set, through the little corner here, and you go to UV editor. But I tend to just hit the tabs because these are workspaces that are already made for these. This is what our UV layout looks like, and it's mirrored. Actually, I need to. There we go. There we go. So we're gonna bake out the texture. First off, we need a texture. So we go to material, we add a new material to it, go to shading, and then we will add a image texture. And what this will do is this is going to create an image for a normal map. You can actually add math, so I can times 2 it, make it 2K. And I'll create a normal map. You don't want this connected to anything. Why? Because it'll create circular discrepancies is what I think it was called, or some dependencies. You also need to go into cycles mode. And what this will do is you unhide your high poly, you select both of them. Blender renders each object separately when it's baking down into one map. I do not know what the logic behind that is necessarily. If you want it to all render this exactly the same, you could actually just merge the models together and then do it. Depends on how you feel. I'm going to keep them separate, then I'm going to bake, and then I'm going to go to cycles. And then I tend to turn this down to like 30 samples because you're not rendering a whole scene. It doesn't need to go over pixels all the time. And then go to bake, and then change this to normal map. And this is all underneath your render tab. You want it to select to active, and then you want to change the cage settings a little bit to see if you can get the best extrusion. And then you hit bake, and then bing bang boom, you're ready to go. And this is actually how you render out bakes faster in Blender, by the way, is by changing the sample size. Because Blender's not rendering an entire scene where it needs to figure out pixels. It's rendering the low poly that's already right up against the high poly model. So it's just baking a texture down. So it doesn't need to be incredibly high to get decent textures, as far as I know. And it'll speed up your rendering times for that. That's why it's kind of important. And you can see it rendered the texture straight into the map. And now it's ready to be used. I'm going to pause for a second so I can save it. Because you need to save these textures so you can change the color space. So I'm going to save this in a folder. I'll just save it here. I'll make a tutorial folder. Normal app, there we go. So when we change this to non-color, because normal maps are non-color, I'll keep it on sRGB and I'll show you. you want to add a normal map shader node, I guess is what it's called. And then you're going to plug the color into the shader node. And why you want it to be non-color is this exact issue. You can see the seams appear. This is what I mean by normal maps are non-color. And in fact, I think it was NVIDIA has the Y in subtract when you're creating normal maps. OpenGL has plus Y. I do not know what that's about, but that is it. And in fact, what normal maps are doing is faking depth through the color channels. If you were to go through all the color channels on this texture, you can actually see that they're different lighting setups. Because this is how the computer computes how the light is rendered on the object. It's really fascinating, actually. But you can see that now we have a a weird ball that's textured, that's low poly. And you can have much better results if you have higher poly models and stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much how it's done.